When it comes to internet rabbit holes, there are none as mysterious and hypnotic as digesting the strange and unusual drug experiences of others. Over the years, I have scoured the internet, diving through old Reddit posts, analysing Erowid trip reports, combing through obscure drug information sites, even contacting strangers on chat rooms. You name it, I've looked into it. Drugs fascinate me, especially the unusual and unknown to most type of compounds. There are many that might seem appealing to try, but there are some that only the insane or insanely ignorant would dare try for themselves. Of all the bizarre and mind-boggling substances that are known to exist, none even compare to the horrors of Datura Stramonium. In this video, we will be exploring 3 different stories written by those brave or outright stupid enough to try this terrifying drug. Before we get to the stories, it would be helpful to give you a basic explanation as to what Datura is, where it comes from, and its potential effects. Datura Stramonium, or just Datura in short, is a poisonous wild plant noticeable for its purple spiny stalks and white flowers shaped like trumpets. You may find it growing on uncultivated land, often in countries with warmer climates, but it has been known to grow in countries such as the UK also. Some plants produce toxic substances and chemicals in order to protect themselves from destructive herbivores, and everything about this particular plant, simply by looking at it, spells out, "Do not eat me." Some humans, however, possess a sense of unpredictable curiosity, and the use of this plant actually dates back thousands of years. It even has a history of being associated with witchcraft and sorcery. Users of Datura, either ingesting or smoking the seeds, experience symptoms such as hallucinations, delirium, psychosis, respiratory depression, arrhythmias, or worse, death. Without trying for yourself, the only way to know the true horrors of Datura is to hear the stories of those who dared try it and lived to tell the tale. I will be reading the stories from the perspective of the storyteller. I'll try to recall this experience as best I can, but it was incredibly powerful. I only wish words did it justice. There was so much more that could possibly be said here. This was amazing, horrible, scary, fascinating, annoying, uncomfortable, painful, and surreal all at once. This happened a few years ago, but I believe it's worth mentioning. I'd been discouraged from recording the experience at the time by the fact that all the careful notes I'd been taking during the experience just turned out to be nothing but scribbles, symbols, and crumpled notepad paper when I examined it the next day. I'd previously been given 150 seeds by a friend who mistook them for morning glory seeds. This mistake could have been dangerous, but in the end I was shown the plant and I properly identified it. I chose to take some seed pods home with me. With a little bit of research online and with the seeds themselves, I ended up finding what I believed to be a dose that would take me far, but wouldn't put me in hospital, or worse. Datura's potency varies 5 to 1, so I now always start with a very, very low dose and work my way up. I prepared 450 individually counted and finely ground seeds into a coffee filter and tied a string around it so it resembled a closed tea bag. I dipped it in a pot of warm water for approximately 24 hours and agitated it every few hours. I discarded the seed bag and I took the potion as the sun fell under the moon. This seemed appropriate because this plant had earned the nickname Moonflower. My brother came up for the weekend and wanted to try the experience with me in the last minute. He was to be my sitter anyway, so I gave the okay. My brother was not made tea, but instead yogurt, so we could get on the experience. For my brother, I prepared 150 ground seeds and sprinkled them into a yogurt mix. I had been fasting all day for the experiment. I do not know what he had to eat, but he weighed around 135 pounds at the time, I believe. It might have been better for him to start at 50 to 100 seeds, but I gave him 150 because he insisted that he wanted to really feel it. I began feeling the effects of this potion before I was done drinking it. Granted, it took me about 15 minutes to finish it because it tasted so foul, but most potions for the mind taste bad, I find. It's almost a rite of passage in my eyes. Still, this kicked in notably fast when compared to my other Datura experiences. My brother had a much easier time downing his yogurt mix. I find, even with a scientific and rational mind, I enjoy the ritualistic aspect of these experiences, so I tend to be as serious about it as I could. This was an exploration of the mind, not recreational intoxication. About 15 to 20 minutes after downing the potion, I was already feeling very drunk and distended from my body. I hadn't even stood up from my original seat. I was just battling nausea. I had been fighting an incredible urge to purge since the first sip, and considering the sheer intensity of the confusion I was facing, I was abandoning the idea I was going to peacefully meditate myself into another plane of thought. I didn't even make it to the bathroom. I purged right into the pot I prepared my brew in, before I even got a chance to stand up. I might be paranoid, but I think this may have saved my life. I faded out of memorable consciousness after stumbling to the bathroom. Time doesn't make any sense. The notes I am writing don't seem to want to form together coherently. I'm very confused and uncomfortable. My stomach doesn't hurt anymore, which makes it more easier to think clearly, but I still feel very drunk and my skin feels incredibly sharp. I'm shaking and I don't know why. It hurts to touch anything that's not completely smooth or soft. Touching anything with my hands or arms sends sharp pains and lightning bolts up my nerves. I think my throat is swelling up, and I'm compulsively drinking water to ensure that it doesn't close. I'm swallowing nothing constantly, just to ensure I can still swallow. Trying to breathe through my nose is easier. My throat might just be numb and not swollen, but I can't tell. I fade out again. I wake up sitting in the dark, apologizing to my blanket for being so intoxicated. I don't know how I got here. I am more self-aware now, but I cannot think clearly, and I seem to genuinely think my blanket is my ex-girlfriend, who had deflated into a pile of self-aware skin and muscle due to the disappointment she felt. She had always disapproved of my studies and claimed I was just trying to get high. She lays there, crumpled on my bed and staring at me disapprovingly, the morose look on her face. I hold her for a while and apologize more. I fade out. I decided to try and take a shower. I believe this was irresponsible and dangerous. It should have been obvious to me because the room was spinning and I found it very difficult to walk or function at all for that matter. My legs just gave out underneath me and I fell into the hallway over and over, stumbling to find my placement. I fade out on my knees, staring at the carpet. This fade seemed to happen quite a bit. I was slipping in and out of consciousness. With Datura, I still seem to function when I'm out, as opposed to the more familiar nod associated with opiates. With an opiate, I wake up right where I faded out, but with Datura, I wake up in a room I don't remember walking into, in the middle of doing things, or talking to people in contexts that don't make any sense, similar to drunken psychosis. I woke up in mid-sentence, realizing I was talking to no one, but aware that I'd been talking for at least 5 minutes prior. I wonder who I must have been talking to. Could it have been my brother? I then realize I am naked. Shortly after that, I realize I'm in the shower with water running down my face. I've been talking to no one. This was very interesting to me. I wonder what could have possibly caused me to slip in and out of worlds like this, with no real recollection of what I'd been doing prior, or at least why I was doing it. I fade out again and wake standing in the hall with a sober brother of mine, a different brother, asking me a question. I don't remember what I had said or what the question was, but he told me the next day that I had answered him coherently, even though the answer had nothing to do at all with the question. While I was in the shower, the brother that had joined me on my adventure had woken my grandmother out of her sleep. This was around 2 in the morning, to inform her the flower truck was outside. Again, we live in the middle of nowhere, no flower truck, no neighbors, and it's not even daytime. I don't believe he saw a flower truck, but I do genuinely think he believed it was there when he told her. I wake up again, in mid-sentence. I'm in my room and having a conversation with some cat-in-the-hat slippers that I have apparently placed on my bed, so the faces faced me. I guess so they could pay attention? I reached over to my laptop to play some music, and nothing was there. I didn't have a laptop. Why did I think one was there? I'm still confused. My skin still tingles painfully, and my throat is still sore and closed at this point. This fade in, fade out theme happened many more times, and every time I woke up talking to an inanimate object or someone that wasn't even there, sometimes still genuinely believing the clock could understand what I was saying. This was a very mind-orientated experience, not classically psychedelic at all. The visuals are light but unique. Jagged changes in my environment take place throughout the trip when the room isn't spinning. Corners and walls bend and shake quickly, then go back to normal, like something out of a horror movie. When the director flashes something weird on the screen for a few frames and then it goes away as fast as it arrived. It is the closest thing I compare it to. Possibly an even better analogy would be to compare it to a fast glitching in a 3D video game model. I'd seen nothing in other entheogens. I finally have to give in to the drowsiness that has been chasing me for the entire night. I go to bed shaking because I feel cold, but I wasn't. Everything I touch still feels like razors cutting my skin, and I will continue drinking water every 3 minutes throughout the night while I am awake. I hear, while trying to lay in bed, auditory hallucinations that sound ominous and far away. Nothing to understand really. It seems like the old trees moaning and whining in the distance, maybe as a way of communicating to each other. The language of the trees, I think, and I slip off to sleep easily enough. I wake with a hangover the next day. I will never do this again, for many reasons. I'm glad, however, that I was able to experience it. I wish I could remember more of it. Even reading this wall of text, it doesn't seem to properly convey to you the experience, the weird almond taste in my mouth, the strange noises and thoughts that don't seem to be my own, etc. Hours of adventure condensed into a few short paragraphs. I believe this was an irresponsible dose, and I had not understood the dangers of it going in. I might just be paranoid, but I didn't know the seeds could be as toxic as they can be during the time of ingestion, and I would not have gone in too deep. It was poor research on my part. I'd recommend the experience itself, but ultimately I would never recommend the dosage I took. With responsibility and caution, it can be quite the experience, but I wouldn't expect it to be fun. The Datura experience. As anyone who knows of this drug, the realms this plant may show you are difficult to put into words, as though describing another sense entirely. It was a July evening. Calming nature surrounded me, and the glistening orange beam of sunlight fell onto the green canopy, emitting a spiritual aura that was to commence me on my journey. For the last few weeks leading up to this, I had wanted to get my curious hands on some Jimson seeds. I had been doing a year abroad in Berkeley, so psychonauts were common. After reading about this mysterious plant, I was more than just intrigued. Having previously had a passion for salvia and other natural deliriants, Datura seemed to be the missing link. I had never fully broken through, but psychedelics had become an almost cult-like obsession of mine. You see, I wasn't interested in the highs, the buzzes, or the euphoria of most substances. What got me was what they don't speak about, the spiritual grounds breaking realities some hidden plants could take you on. This made everything else irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. This Valhalla was one I could only really see without having to imagine. So after reading about this substance, my intrigue was too powerful. I felt as though I was chosen, as though this was now my turn to peek behind the curtain. Eventually, after countless dark web searches, my efforts came to no avail. In fact, this only made me more desperate to find it. Of all the psychonauts I knew, only one could help me in his search. This guy was called Jack. He was to become the one person I would take this with. After a few days of waiting, I was awoken from my sleep to see that I had managed to find some seeds. I froze. Reality hit me. This was real. My brain was anxious, but my desires prevailed. The mix of adrenaline and excitement led to loss of sleep that night. Taking the Datura. After having prepared the day for this trip, we drove into the forest in silence. We took the seeds. I felt belly aching nausea for the first 5 minutes. Now we wait, I thought. Jack stood watching me as trip sitter, slowly roasting a joint as I prepared myself. All anxiety had gone. In fact, I felt completely sober, clear-headed, but physically slow. Suddenly, after a while, I saw my friend Jess. She'd come along to see how I was doing. She'd been there before with me on shrooms, but I hadn't seen her in so long. Are you feeling it yet? Not really, I just feel dehydrated. I think they might be low dosed. However, I felt this negative feeling in my gut when I looked at her. I remembered the fakeness and wondered why she was even here. She cheated on me. She's not my friend. Jack called out, "What are you doing? Come back." Why is he trying to stop me from seeing Jess, I thought. For a brief second, reality struck me. What am I doing? I looked up to see nothing but cool air. Night was commencing. Shivers went down my spine. My anxiety grew rapidly. I knew I was delirious. Then I was back to this strange realm. We decided we needed to get back. Things were becoming more and more weird. We somehow made it to my apartment. Jack insisted on staying to look after me. Whilst the PS4 was on, I thought I'd make a drink for my guest. I saw my dad there. His face seemed so much younger, but anger could be seen in his face. "Don't invite people here without telling me. This isn't your place." I sulked off like a child back to my room. I opened the window, pulled out a Lucky Strike and puffed it. It was euphoric, but just as I was beginning to have my first few inhales, I heard Jack run into my room. "Close the window right now." "Why?" He slammed it back and the look of terror on his face. "You're not in a good way." "Shut up. I invited you to Dad's apartment for the night to chill. Don't be a pain." "You're fucked. This isn't your dad's place. Your dad's passed away. We need to sober you up. I'm worried." "I'm fine." I didn't take any real notice of what he was saying. In fact, I barely recognized him. Why is he in my house? I knew I was supposed to be doing something today. I'd forgotten I'd taken Datura, forgotten who Jack was, and forgotten who I was. This terrified me. Paradox after paradox, I was insane. I carried on smoking. This is where things began to take a dark turn. My memory is still fuzzy for this part of the experience, but according to Jack's recollection, I was angrily speaking gibberish. Not just a mixed match of words, but complete fluent gibberish, as if I was speaking another language. However, things got even more intense, and this is where my memory is really hazy. Jack told me I was puffing away on an imaginary cigarette, talking to myself for an hour. Once he came into the room, however, he saw that I was in serious delirium. My arms were bleeding. I felt as though pain would take me away from this hellish reality. Pain would make me feel normal. Pain would zap me back for a microsecond of reality, to have a glimpse back on normality. Just to be clear, I've never been into self-harming before this, had been free from any mental illnesses. This was the only anecdote for me to escape this hell. Only a few minor cuts were in my arm before I dropped a pocket knife in a small puddle of blood. This was not the enlightening experience I thought I may have. After Jack moved me to bed, he said I lucidly told him I was sobering up and was fine. This couldn't be further from the truth, but this truth was found out only too late. The whispers pounding my mind were unbearable. I had lost my mind. After I crashed, I found myself on Jack's sofa. He found me laying unconscious on the floor in the kitchen with butter spread all over the floor and cat food on top of the fridge. Eventually, after a few days, I was back into normal reality, yet the effects had never completely subsided. The existential dread of this trip was so real and horrifying. I've been diagnosed with manic depression and general anxiety. Jack never really spoke to me in the same way, and I feel completely alone, knowing just behind this very thin fabric of normality is hell just around the corner. Datura is the antithesis of enlightenment. It is the destroyer of hope. Back when I was young, impressionable, and absolutely hooked on psychedelics, I was given the opportunity to try some Datura that a friend had picked from who knows where. He and I diced up and boiled several of the spiky pods and ate a handful of the red and black seeds. I distinctly remember my pupils dilating and vision becoming extraordinarily blurry for several days, but that was about it for the both of us. No feelings of euphoria or any kind of high, just a bland experience and a bad taste in my mouth from the tea. We chalked it up to overblown accounts of tripping and exaggerated stories. I'd later find out that we couldn't have been more wrong. Fast forward a few weeks and my wife, who was then my girlfriend, and I were at my parents' house looking to pass some time on a Saturday evening. I remembered that I'd still had a few Datura pods in the freezer that I kept from my previous experience, and I asked my wife if she wanted to try them. I told her of my experience and that it had been more of a benign experience than anything, not expecting her to get any more of a buzz from it. She agreed, and we boiled up another pot of tea in my parents' kitchen. I even offered my mother some, who had never been a recreational drug user, but I figured the stuff was literally harmless. I'd later find out that it affects people differently, and was very glad my mother opted not to try it. About an hour after my wife drank her tea, she started getting very fidgety and was unable to sit still at all. We were trying to watch a movie, but she'd just keep jumping up, stretching, and wandering in and out of the room. She did this several times and would come back and sit down again. She then left the movie for about 20 minutes and wandered into our living room where I could hear her talking and laughing. I walked upstairs and found her standing in a dark room, giggling, with her hand on the side of her face. I asked what she was doing and she said she was chatting with a friend. She had no phone in her hand, just an empty palm, yet she was having what seemed like a legitimate conversation with someone who wasn't there. I was dumbfounded, as this was similar to reports I'd read of people experiencing Datura. I'd taken probably 4 times more than what she did when I tried it, plus I ate the seeds, and got nothing like this. I probed her a little bit and she swore that she was not tripping, or even feeling euphoric. She genuinely thought that she was sober. I was curious if maybe it was a placebo effect and was all in her mind. I realized she wasn't when she started chasing my family's black and white cat around the house, giggling and saying, "Come on, you little fluffy penguin." She kept asking where my family bought a pet penguin with a dead seriousness in her eyes, and that's when I realized that her pupils were the size of dinner plates. I knew that she was tripping hard. She also started getting a little hysterical and noisy at this point, so I figured I needed to work on calming her down a little bit. This was about 2 or 3 hours after ingestion. We went outside and smoked a bowl of some high-grade cannabis that I had, hoping this might calm her down a little bit. It didn't have any effect. Another hour or so went by and she was still fidgety and talking absolute nonsense. I managed to get her to eat something and got her in the shower, still trying to calm her down. This seemed to work, or so I thought, as she finally started to relax and settle down. We managed to finish the movie, but she was starting to get lethargic. It was around 2 in the morning at this point. We were both living with our parents at the time, and she would need to get back to her parents' house. I wanted to be sure that she wasn't going to freak out, and she reassured me that she was fine and just wanted to go to sleep. She had finally stopped talking to imaginary objects, so I took her home, thinking little else of it. About 7 AM the next morning, I'm awoken by a call from her mother, demanding to know what the fuck I gave her daughter. Still a bit groggy, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or actually on the phone. Then she told me that she was in the hospital with my wife, and the doctors needed to know what she was on. I came to my senses real quick at that point and started to freak out a bit. I explained what I gave her and then headed straight to the hospital. When I arrived, she had just finished drinking a charcoal slurpee, as she described it, and she said she wanted her money back because of how horrible it tasted. She still didn't realize she was in the hospital being treated for potential drug overdose. I was pulled aside by her mother and an attending physician and was asked about the previous night. I didn't hide anything, and I told them that I seriously thought it was harmless based on my own experience with it and its legality. Her mother explained that she tried to get in her dad's truck at about 5:30 in the morning to go grocery shopping, and got visibly agitated when they told her that she needed to come back inside. Luckily, she didn't have the keys, because I have no doubt that she'd have killed herself or someone else if she'd have managed to get out of the driveway. I could hear her talking again, and knowing that no one was in the room with her, I went in and tried talking to her. She said she was talking to a new nurse who hid behind the trash can once I came into the room. The trash can was about 3 feet tall. I couldn't believe that she was still tripping this hard, but here we were. Other absurd things were said between the hospital visit and when she finally sobered up, but I've gotten most of the point across. This was many years ago, before information was so readily available on the internet. Had I have known about these reactions were even possible, I would never have given it to her. This was her first and last experience with a hallucinogen. I absolutely would not recommend anyone using this. It seemed that it would either have a negligible effect on a person or will make them completely lose their mind for a day or two. Very little recreational value in my eyes. I'm not a recreational drug user anymore, but even I know that there are many other psychedelics out there that are enjoyable and worth trying at least once. Datura isn't one of them. If you take anything away from today's video, you'll take the advice from the storytellers and stay well away from this dangerous plant. This is not something that is fun. You won't feel euphoria like you do with LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. Only confusion, terror, and regret. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video format. If you want to see more disturbing stories, hit the subscribe button and maybe check out some of my other videos. I'll see you in the next one.